At this point, I believe that you are very good in simplify roots and identify roots. But what happens when we have to multiply a couple of roots, like square root of 7 times square root of 2? Well, it's not that complicated, because remember that we can use a property of the roots. And this property is square root of a times square root of b is equal to the square root of a times b. So we can actually join together two square roots, they are multiplied together to give a big square root. So if two numbers are inside of square root, we can multiply the number together. So in this case, the first square root is 7, square root of 7, and the second one is square root of 2. So we can put everything together and say that we are going to find square root of 7 times 2. That is square root of 14. This is actually what you have to do, and it's the final result. And what does happen when we have to divide two square root? Well, actually, a property very similar to the previous one, we can use another property very similar to the previous one. We see that when we got square root of a divided by the square root of b, we can put everything together and get the square root of a divided by b. So what does it mean in our case with number? That means that square root of 7 divided by square root of 3 can become a big square root of 7 over 3. Now, in this case, it may not seem so useful, but if we have square root of 8 divided by square root of 2, these are 2/3, and we cannot actually do much about it. But if we use this property and we put everything together and we say 8 divided by 2, everything under a big square root, we can say that 8 divided by 2 is 4. So if I put 4 under a square root, I know there is 2. So you see, we can pass from something that looks very complicated to something that is quite simple. So remember this property of the square roots, because you will need it all over again during these years. Welcome back. So now we are very familiar with these two properties, that if two square root of two numbers inside of square root multiply or divide each other, we can actually put everything inside of a square root and multiply and divide this number. But what happens if I got square root of 48 plus square root of 48? Can I just say is square root of 96? Well, no, I can't. This is very wrong. So what can I do is try to use what we learned in the previous video and try to simplify 48. So 48, we said that we can find out that the prime factor of 48 is this one. I can divide 48 by 2 and get 24, divided by 2 and get 12, divided by 2 and get 6, divided by 2 and I get 3. So you see, now we got one square there and we got another square there, plus we got the 3. So if you're going to rewrite this, we can write the square in blue like 2 square under the square root times the square in black, that is square 2, times the remaining square root of 3. So this is exactly like to write square root of 48. It's the same thing, just written in a different way. So we know the square root of 2 square is 2 times 2 times square root of 3. So we know that 2 times 2 is 4 square root of 3. Now remember that two numbers outside the square root, we can multiply them together, like 2 and 2, and we can multiply together two numbers inside the square root, like a and b. In the case before, we saw 1. But we cannot multiply together a number and a number inside of square root. So 4 times square root of 3 remain 4 times square root of 3. We cannot we cannot multiply them together. So now our goal was to do square root of 48 plus square root of 48. Now we know that 48, square root of 48 is like, right, 4 square root of 3 plus 4 square root of 3. You see, I'm just substituting 4 square root of 3 instead of 48, and I do it twice because we have 2 times square root of 48. Okay, now how can we do square root of 4 square root of 3 plus 4 square root of 3? Well, it's not that hard. You have to consider that square root of 3 is a variable, something that we cannot mix with the numbers. So it's like to write this way. For square root of 3, 4 square root of 3 is like to write square root of 3 times square root of 3 times square root of 3 times square root of 3 plus square root of 3 times square root of 3 times square root of 3 times square root of 3. Why? Because we are summing this 4 square root of 3 plus this 4 square root of 3. Now, if you count, it's like that we are multiplying 8 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times square root of 3. So this is actually the solution that we are looking for. 8 square root of 3 is equal to 4 square root of 3 plus 4 square root of 3. And 4 square root of 3 is square root of 48. We can say the square root of 48 plus square root of 48 is equal to 8 square root of 3. Hopefully this video helped you, and I'll see you in class.